Hello, everyone. Welcome to Refugee Welcome Collective Lunch and Learn series. In these sessions, we aim to bring you interesting and timely information. Whether you are a volunteer, community sponsor, resettlement agency staff, a local advocate, or just someone who's interested in learning more, we hope that you enjoy today's session, Human Trafficking Prevention and Awareness. Refugee Welcome Collective collaborates with partners to provide in-depth training programs, weekly learning sessions, resources, and on-demand technical assistance for sponsor, resettlement agency staff, refugees paired with sponsors, community and institutional partners, and others to support quality community sponsorship programs across the United States. We're just going to talk about some housekeeping here. Everyone is automatically muted for our session today. However, if you have any questions, please feel free to submit your questions in the chat. And towards the end, we're also going to have 15 minutes for Q&A, where you can unmute yourself and ask your questions, and our presenter is going to be answering them. Also, just for your information, please know that this webinar is going to be recorded, and a recording of this webinar is going to be sent to everyone who registered for today's webinar. We send our apologies to everyone who registered to the webinar on GoTo platform. We unfortunately had a little bit of issue with the platform, so we had to shift to Zoom. But thank you for being flexible and being here with us. Please know that there is a recording, so we want your permission for that, since there's a recording. And again, the presentation and any resources and recording of this webinar would be sent to everyone immediately the day after our session. And that would bring us to our presenter today, Galina Doris, who is the Associate Director of Programs with Church World Service. Thank you, Galina, for being here with us, and I will give it to you from here.
Thank you, Joy. Welcome everyone to our training, and I'm happy to be here to start our conversation about human trafficking and prevention and awareness. Okay, Grace, perfect. Our goal today of this training is to define human trafficking, to discuss prevalence of human trafficking both nationally and locally. I'll be specifically focusing on California state. We'll discuss risk factors and signs of human trafficking. Then we'll discuss tips for safety and steps that caseworkers or anyone who is identifying trafficking victim can take to provide resources, and we'll discuss briefly resources as well. Next slide. I wanted to focus a little bit on CWS current efforts against human trafficking. We have been participating in some advocacy with the United States government, like stated right here. CWS released their statement to the United States Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committees that investigates to human trafficking, and specifically human trafficking globally. We're also currently providing services, as you all know, for home study and post-release programs. And our caseworkers in those programs are trained on identifying and providing immediate resources for human trafficking victims. And currently, we are trying to establish our first pilot program, a human trafficking program that will launch in California, hopefully of October this year, where CWS can provide its own services for human trafficking survivors. Next slide. Okay, well, we'll start with a definition of human trafficking. Human trafficking was established by the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, or TVAP, of 2000, which defines severe forms of trafficking in person. And I want to note that this definition is federal definition, so in your states, it might add more to human trafficking definition or less, depending on your state law. So first, what is sex trafficking according to federal definition? Any recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, obtaining, or patronizing or solicitation of a person for the purpose of commercial sex act. in which the commercial sex act is induced by force, fraud, or coercion, in which person induced to perform such act has not attained 18 years of age. So I want to make it clear that there's no such thing as child prostitution. So anyone who is under age of 18 will automatically qualify as human trafficking victim if they're forced into prostitution or selling sex and things like that. Labor trafficking is very similar to that. It also includes the recruitment, harboring, transportation, provision, or obtaining of a person for a labor or service through use of force, fraud, or coercion, which can include involuntary servitude, peonage, debt, bondage, or slavery. So it's important with those definitions that we are including not just actual act of human trafficking, but as I listed, recruitment, obtaining, patronizing, transportation. So any of those steps will be identifying as human trafficking and are prosecuted by law. We'll be discussing this more in the video that we see that, but I wanted to point this out that human trafficking is very, very highly organized crime, and that involves usually many people who are involved there. One is identifying potential victims, or for example, what we call phishing online or in at school grounds or like a shopping mall. Another person might be involved in transportation of the victim, right? Another person is participating in holding them hostage. So all of those are human trafficking and human trafficking steps. I just wanted to really quickly speak about smuggling. Smuggling is different than human trafficking. Smuggling of migrants is defined as in Article 3 of the Smuggling of Migrants Protocol, involves the facilitation of a person's illegal entry into a state for financial or other material benefits. Although it's a crime against the state, not person. So human trafficking is a crime against a person where someone is forced to enter, for example, into the United States for the purposes of labor or sex trafficking. Smuggling is different, right? Where the person actually pays the smuggler to enter to United States. But a lot of times from what we're seeing, both are going to be intertwined, and where a person is smuggled, a lot of times they were forced to enter United States, which would be human trafficking. Next slide. There are many types of trafficking. We're not going to cover all of them. Today, there's 9 types of trafficking, which will include not just your labor trafficking, sex trafficking, online trafficking, also familial trafficking, and for example, organ trafficking. We're not discussing all of them today. We're only focusing on sex, labor, and sex trafficking is they're one of the most prevalent types of trafficking as of lately. Sex trafficking online is very prevalent, specifically on websites such as Backpage.com, where women, men, and children are available what it's called for purchase, with sexual acts as their product to sell. Such websites made it easier than ever for traffickers to find victims and have made forms of payment nearly impossible to trace. In addition, traffickers are able to quickly friend and follow potential victims through various apps such as Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, and so on. Many victims become romantically involved with their traffickers and are then forced or manipulated into prostitution or false promises of a job. Next slide. And Grace, let's play that video that will describe more types of trafficking that I just mentioned.
In a small sleepy town, people are dreaming. But not everyone's dreams will come true. Human traffickers prey on people's dreams and lure them away for their own benefit. How do they do this? Human trafficking doesn't happen all of a sudden. It's a process. First, traffickers act. This includes recruiting victims, transporting them to the place where they'll be exploited, hiding them from authorities, and receiving victims from other traffickers. So why don't the victims run away or say no? Because traffickers use different means. This includes threatening or forcing victims to do what they want, abducting or deceiving the victims, and abusing power. Sometimes traffickers promise small payments or benefits to get the victim to cooperate. And why are the traffickers doing this? The purpose of trafficking is exploitation. Traffickers take advantage of victims for their own profit or benefit. This is human trafficking. This man's neighbor tells him that he has a great job for him on a very safe construction site and that he'll be paid a lot of money. With more money, he can make his dreams come true. He agrees to take the job. A few days later, the neighbor's friend picks him up and they drive to the construction site. It's a very long way from his home. This man is put to work immediately without any training or protective equipment, without enough to eat or drink, and with very few breaks. After many months, he's only been paid a fraction of what he was promised. He knows he's been tricked, but he doesn't have enough money to get home. This man is a victim of human trafficking. He was recruited by his neighbor and tricked into thinking he was going to work at a safe construction site for fair pay. Instead, he was forced to work long hours in unsafe conditions for almost no money, while others benefited from his exploitation. One day, while looking for jobs online, this woman comes across an opportunity to work in a restaurant in a big city. Her application is successful, and her new employer arranges for her travel there. She is met at the airport and driven to a part of the city that looks nothing like she expected. The car pulls up to a building. The door is shut and locked behind her. She is made to perform sex acts against her will. She is trapped. This woman is a victim of human trafficking. She was transported by a trafficker from the airport to the location of the job. When she arrived at the location and realized it was not the restaurant job she was expecting, the traffickers used force to keep her there. She was then exploited for forced sex work. This 14-year-old boy on school break is approached on the street by a woman who looks trustworthy. She tells him that she needs workers at her factory, and she promises him lots of money. He brings her to meet his parents. They are so happy for him. He'll now be able to save money for school. The woman drives him to the next town. They pull up to an old building. There is someone waiting for him. As he is led inside, the nice lady drives off. The factory isn't anything like she described. There are lots of people working, including many children. He works all day, and after just a few hours of sleep, he starts again. He is sad. This isn't what he expected. He misses his family. After weeks, he still hasn't received any salary or been allowed to contact them. He is trapped. This boy is a victim of human trafficking. He was tricked by the woman who recruited him on the street. He was then received by a trafficker when he arrived at the factory and exploited by being forced to sew clothing. For anyone under the age of 18, only the act and purpose matter for it to legally be a case of human trafficking. Understanding that human trafficking doesn't happen all at once, but instead is a process of act, means, and purpose, helps us better identify victims and trafficking trends. People everywhere are dreaming and looking for opportunities to make those dreams come true. Human trafficking is happening all around us. Will you recognize it when you see it?
Thank you, Grace. Perfect. You can go to next slide. Perfect. Okay, thank you. Again, I really like this video because it briefly summarizes what the law states, right? The federal law of different kind of steps, right? And how many people might be involved in trafficking. So hopefully that was cleared through that video. But also I wanted to note that this video was focusing mostly on labor and sex trafficking, but also sometimes we have like familial trafficking, right? When you don't have those extra people involved in trafficking, we have seen scenarios where it would be husband trafficking his own wife or parents trafficking their own children, right? So again, this video focused on one particular type of trafficking, but there's various types of trafficking out there. To give you a little perspective, global statistics state that according to the International Labor Organization, there are 27.6 million people in situation of forced labor on any given day, with 6.3 million in situation of forced commercial sexual exploitation. And I wanted to state that those numbers, we don't think those are the really good estimate, just approximate estimate, because it's really hard to get data on trafficking, and also especially with the recent situations, global crisis, right? And pandemic, which we're still recovering from, we anticipate that those numbers are actually higher as of right now, but we're just not tracking that information globally. Next slide. Okay, so let's discuss prevalence of human trafficking here in the United States. I'm mentioning Polaris. Polaris is actually international agency that focuses on human trafficking data collection, and they work very closely with law enforcement and policymakers to share that data. So according to Polaris, we have documented more than 32,000 cases of human trafficking between 2007 and 2016 in the United States. And again, we anticipate those numbers probably quadrupled in the past year, especially between 2020 and 2023, but we just don't have the most recent report as of right now yet. Common industries where we see trafficking include escort services, illicit massages, health and beauty places like your nail salons, right, massage salons, and so on, residential sex trafficking, involuntary domestic servitude, where someone is trafficked to perform, like, cleaning, housekeeping of the house, for example, and they're kept captive at that house. Pornography, traveling sales crews, restaurant and food services is highly prevalent, peddling and begging on streets, landscaping, art and entertainment, commercial cleaning services, factories, and manufacturing. Next slide. I will focus on a few cases in California, and the reason being is, first of all, United States sadly is the #1 buyer of human beings worldwide, one of the top buyers. And in the United States, we have 3 states that have the highest human trafficking rates. Rates. Again, it's California, New York, and Florida states. In human trafficking, so I will discuss some trafficking cases in California. Recently, we had a case back in 2018 where a family of 4, they were all four family, 4 running several senior and child care centers here in San Mateo County in California, and they have been charged with human trafficking and other labor trafficking related charges. During this operation, law enforcement discovered more than 100 victims that were working for them, and they had multiple children's centers and adult care centers in San Mateo counties. So what was happening there? People were promised right financial gain. They were providing childcare or adult care services. Then, after the shift was done, they were kept in the basement with no food. They were physically and sexually abused, right? And the next day they were forced to do work again. And sadly, is San Mateo, I don't know if many of you know, is very wealthy county, and so it's very it's interesting that they were able to do this here in San Mateo County. And also what was discovered during this investigation, that the child care centers, some of them had law enforcement officers that were dropping off their own children at those centers, and they had no idea that the workers that are working there are being trafficked. Next slide. Let's discuss causes of human trafficking. It's important to understand that anyone can become a victim of human trafficking. And the risk factors and causes that we see is poverty, lack of education, demand for cheap labor or sex, no human rights protection, socioeconomic disparities, cultural factors, conflicts, wars, natural disasters. Those are huge forces for human trafficking. Lack of safe migration options, and of course, profit, right? Profit is what really drives human trafficking, because there's a lot of buyers, and it's a multi-billion now industry that produces a lot of financial gain and profit for the buyers. Next slide. So let's discuss briefly human trafficking indicators. How can you spot that someone might be a victim of trafficking? Let's say if someone discloses to you that they're living with their employer, that might be a red flag. Poor living conditions, multiple people in cramped spaces, inability to speak to individual alone, right? For example, if you have a client, you're talking to them and they're, keep looking at another person who is present there, right? Every time before they answer, right? Not having eye contact with you, or scared to speak up and say anything. Answers appear to be scripted and rehearsed, because all trafficking victims are, usually they have phrases that they have to learn and memorize, that introduced to them by traffickers. So a lot of time you can see the answers are very rehearsed, and it feels like they're just speaking out of memory. Employer holding identity documents, that could be a red flag. Signs of physical abuse, of course. Submissive or fearful, unpaid or paid very little, and of course under 18 and in prostitution. Next slide. So let's discuss some general safety tips, how to make sure that we, tips that we can share with our clients as well, right? To stay safe, and not end up in human trafficking hands. First, I always say, trust your judgment and intuition, instinct. If something feels odd about offer, or someone is asking you to go somewhere and it just feels odd, trust your judgment, and maybe let someone know, your friends and family, where are you going, what job opportunities are offered, and contact numbers that were provided to you. Allow trusted family member, friend to keep you safe. Keep possessions of your all important documents. Your employer should not have possession of your social securities, passports, and other identification documents. Try to keep control and possession of some way to communicate and access your money, and contact responsible organizations for assistance. Next slide. I also wanted to discuss internet safety, as there is reports coming from FBI recently that there is a high prevalence that quadrupled in the last 2 years since Afghan crisis, and traffickers are specifically targeting Afghan youth that is coming here to the United States online. So I wanted to share some safety tips. First is set strict privacy settings on your social media. Be aware of strange friend requests and don't accept friend requests from people that you do not know. Don't overshare information. I know how we all love to share where we ate, where we're going shopping, and so on. Try not to overshare such information because someone might be tracking your next steps. Be aware of advertisements that seem too good to be true on social media. Know the warning signs of trafficking. Don't share your locations on social media. Create strong password and change it over time. And get help or raise the alarm when you feel like you're being trafficked or traffic is trying to approach you on social media. Next slide. So let's discuss what to do, right, if you suspect human trafficking and steps, right? First, I highly encourage all of us who's on the call today, and maybe Joy, we can follow up with this more, is identify local service providers in your area and get their referral information. So I'm going to be providing some national resource today, but it's so helpful for you to know, okay, who is in your community, in your state, in your city, provides human trafficking services, and make sure to get in contact with them to get their referral information, because you want to know exactly how to get in touch with them. Maybe they can share with you some phone numbers, flyers, or something, right, that you can later share with potential human trafficking victim. A lot of times nowadays, service providers get very creative how they can share their resources. For example, lately what's been popular, little chapsticks, right, with their phone number of service providers in the back, right, that looks like a barcode, right, that you can get and just keep at your desk or in your purse for any time you might suspect someone that they're being trafficked, right? So have your resources ready at your office. Do not share with client that you suspect that they're victims of human trafficking, but instead focus the conversation on their basic needs and the resources available. Team, first, the client that you're working with or anyone you can come in contact with might not know, first of all, they're actually being trafficked. Then the term your human trafficking victim or potential victim might be very overwhelming and stressful for them. So you do not want to say that out loud, but you can just say something, hey, you know what, I know some agency that provides services, like, you know, if you need mental health support or case management, or it could be financial assistance. So focus on the needs, immediate needs that you see that you know potential client will need, and focus more conversation about that. Or they're sharing with you that their employer not paying them, right, or they need assistance with childcare, whatever that can be, right, and focus mostly on that need and not sharing with them that you're suspecting that they're a victim of human trafficking. Next slide. I also wanted to discuss the steps not to take when you suspect that someone is trafficked. First is over-promising, right? We don't want to over-promise anything, you know, that, oh, you're going to be safe, you know, someone is going to come and rescue you and so on, right? Because that can quickly, usually human trafficking victims already have issues with trusting, reaching for resources. You know, they're afraid that traffickers will follow them and so on. And over-promising can quickly, break their trust into services, law enforcement, or whoever is trying to work with them. Do not drive clients to their home. Instead, order an Uber, Lyft, or taxi, wherever that could be, because you do not know, you know, traffickers might be already following them. The traffickers might be at their home, right? You don't want to display your own vehicle, and especially your license and so on, and you do not want to be followed. Do not provide client your personal contact information at any means. And I would suggest keeping your personal information, even, you know, when it's general practice, you know, not sharing your last name, for example, right? And only providing your first name when working with clients. Offering emotional support or talking about their trauma, that could be very dangerous. as you might be re-traumatizing at that moment. And, many of us are not equipped to work with human trafficking because that takes specific certifications, interviewing skills, and so on. And what can happen, you can overwhelm potential human trafficking survivor by discussing their trauma and what's going on, right? Do not try to get all of those details, and that can lead to mental distress and potential suicidal ideation and suicidal attempts once they leave your office, and we do not want to have that. Next slide. Immediate needs of human trafficking victims. I just wanted to point this out because they're going to be different from any clients that you usually work with. First and foremost, they will need safe shelter. And again, you need to know who are the service providers and shelters you have in the area who you can quickly contact to provide safe shelter. Most of the time, the safe shelters will make sure either, that victim is transferred to another state, right? Usually we want to transport them out from the area where they were trafficked in case traffickers are looking for them, right? And usually those safe shelters will ensure that their identity is hidden, right? And they usually work with law enforcement to provide that safety. There might be some law enforcement involvement depending on situation, right? If there is a active operation and rescue operation, comprehensive case management, comprehensive medical mental health support, and financial assistance. And usually service providers know about that and can provide not just one-time financial assistance, but long-term financial assistance to help victim. Next slide. Resources here, I provided a human trafficking hotline, which is a national hotline, and one can reach to them by calling, texting, or initiating live chat. But again, I encourage everyone, and I can assist with that, to focus on your local resources that can be quickly accessed. But of course, a national hotline is connected to all states, and they know who are the resources in each state, right? So they can also support you in identifying resources in specific state. And I will end here. I know this was very, very brief, but do I want to leave time for questions, or I can kind of go back and provide more details on any slides that we have discussed?
Thank you so much, Galina. That's very, very helpful. And so now is going to be the time for us to take your questions. So I'll just invite you to unmute yourself if you have any question, or if you would like to leave your question in the chat, and Galina is going to have a look and answer your questions. So let's just take this time to answer the questions that you have.
So I think I see one question that says, how about the reporting to police? Sure, that's one of the steps, but I also want you to know with human trafficking victims, what's important for them is to have control over their life and their situation. So not every victim would want to work with law enforcement. So you want to give them that option. So when you're talking to them, that's why I said it's important to know what they would want to do, right? And discuss their options, because I have worked in the past 6 years with human trafficking victims, and a lot of times they did not seek law enforcement help, and team is because human traffickers were looking for them. They did not feel safe. They were receiving threats from human traffickers, or they were threatened and fearful for safety of their family members. Also, the prosecution process is extremely difficult. Like I mentioned, especially labor trafficking, online sex trafficking, it is hard for prosecutors, district attorneys' offices to find enough evidence, right, to prosecute traffickers. And for the victims to testify. So we definitely want to discuss that option if they choose that option, but also in no way we should be forcing anyone to seek law enforcement help if they don't want to. And the way our service providers are, structured is that they can provide the, all resources, comprehensive services, right, for the victim to start their life all over again in a case they don't want to reach to law enforcement. So give that option to victim of trafficking. Do you have links to data research for how trafficking is happening in refugee population currently? Sure, I have some local, I'm working with one of the local data research centers, so I can definitely see what we have there as well. Yeah, and we can follow up during maybe after this. Is there data on where most human trafficking victims are coming from? What region of the world or countries? I want to say from all over, and I also want to state that we also, and in my practice too, we have seen a lot of United States, residents, right, of human trafficking. So traffickers do not discriminate against any races, but definitely recently we see, of course, higher prevalence from Central America. Then we see higher prevalence from Afghanistan right now. Ukraine and Moldova, like Soviet Union countries, because a lot of times from what we're seeing, Mexican cartels, are involved, right? Then European mafia, Russian mafia is involved, and local or highly organized criminals are involved in this. So those are the late countries that we're seeing, but definitely traffickers do not discriminate against any race, and we definitely see victims from all over the globe. I see a hand, Joy.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
So yeah, I have a follow-up question about reporting to law enforcement. We say human trafficking is a crime. So how about that? It's just it might not be about a specific victim, but how about reporting to law enforcement about that crime if we know who the traffickers are? Because we might help the victim to kind of get services with whatever shelter or other services, but if the traffickers are still out there, somebody else is going to be a victim too. So how about reporting the crime and the criminals?
Sure, you can do that. That's an excellent question. Sure, you can absolutely do that. If you know information of potential traffickers, sure, you can absolutely report this to law enforcement. Okay, can you share the link? Okay, can you share the link video? Yes, we will. Okay, I don't see, Joy, I don't see any more questions.
So I have a, do we have someone else that, yes, Margie?
Sorry, quick question real quick.
Yeah.
Can you share a little bit about your recommendations for how service providers should continue to support potential victims when the only communication that they have seems to be controlled through the potential trafficker?
And you mean the oh, okay, I see.
Yeah. We have a lot of cases where it's only one person in the house has a cell phone, and we're worried about our clients who don't have good communication, and every time that we interact with them there are some red flags and things like that, but our only communication with them is through someone who seems to be controlling.
Okay, sounds good. So Margie, I don't know if it's available, if you have any unrestricted funds or so on. I always encourage purchasing that disposable phone. It doesn't cost that much, if you can. I don't know, that depends on circumstances, right? And providing that to the client so you can have that free conversation. But if you suspect that someone is controlling your entire conversation and so on, like I said, do not focus or discuss anything about human trafficking or your victim and so on. Focus your conversation on the needs, right? For example, I had a recent example where I was focusing more on childcare, right? And the trafficker was actually very open for the victim to get childcare, right? And he was totally okay with me, providing the service numbers, right? And over time, he trusted me to have a separate conversation with the victim, right? Because according to what he was seeing, all of us discussing just childcare, right? But so what, and this, this can really be helpful if you have a local resource provider, right, service provider that focuses on human trafficking services. You can already be in contact with them and say, hey, here's what's going on, here's what I know, and I'm, help me to get through this, right, and like initiate the conversation. I'm going to refer to you as a childcare provider. Here's the situation. So that's going to be like our code, right, that you're providing only childcare services, for example. So, right, so that potential trafficker is not suspecting. So, like I said, a lot of times they'll be very open if you're offering some help and services, right, or saying, you know what, I have this agency who can help you befriend, and they provide financial assistance and so on, right, which is in fact is a human trafficking service provider.
Okay, thank you.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, great. Well, if we don't have any more questions, that's going to be the end of our webinar. Thank you so much, Galina, for being with us today. And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. And would like to hear from you and receive any feedback on today's webinar and hear your suggestions for future Lunch and Learn topics. So we would ask you to just take a minute to scan the QR code on the screen to just let us know about other topics that you would be interested in, and also to let us know about give us your feedback about today's webinar. And if not, you can also find it in the chat. You will have a link for that. And again, I'm going to be sending a link with the recording of today's webinar and also other resources that Galina have shared and some data and stuff that you guys have asked for. And I want to thank you so much. Another thing that I want to mention here is the RWC app that we have. It's a great app for, if you want to get some information about your volunteers and tracking volunteers and donations. That would be a great app for you to track your donations and support and volunteers. So please make use of it or reach out to us if you would like to get more information about it. Thank you, everyone, for joining RWC Lunch and Learn series, and have a great rest of your week.